the lockdown was going to create a diabolical, if not a catastrophic, economic tsunami for businesses of all sizes in the South African economy.
This is the Better Business series, and today on the show we welcome Adam Craker. Adam is CEO of IQ Business, which is the largest independent management consulting firm in South Africa and a Certified B Corp. He's passionate about business as a force for good, and under his leadership, IQ Business has been responsible for a number of initiatives aimed at helping the business community through COVID-19, but also in 2018 saw them win the coveted Conscious Companies Award. There's truly no one better to speak to about translating purpose into action. And therefore we welcome Adam to the show and truly look forward to the discussion ahead.
Great to reconnect with you, Tom, and to be part of the discussion.
Brilliant. Now, Adam, working in the management consulting arena, this is a sphere that's generated a couple of stereotypes over the past few years. And yet you've managed to carve what is, quite proudly a very mission-driven, purpose-driven niche in the industry. Tell us what motivates this mission.
Well, Tom, I think certainly as South Africa's largest or leading management technology consulting company, we were really motivated by the challenges that our clients face. And there are many. And we are in the context of a very challenging environment, let's face it, in South Africa. And we developed a view, in fact, 9 years ago, around our vision to really grow the business services sector in South Africa. And it was only 4 years after that we began to really think about why we are doing this. And in the kind of Simon Sinek world of the golden circles, we spent much of our time focusing on the what and the how elements of our business and how we're relevant to our clients. But we hadn't really thought through the why as effectively as we should. And that transitioned quite quickly when we realized and began to focus on the context of the environment in a very low growth environment in South Africa that really needed to stimulate economic growth and an inclusive economic growth in our economy. So those were really the motivators for us.
And are you finding in these trying times that it actually galvanizes you around that mission, or are you finding it challenging the mission in some areas?
Well, I mean, there's nothing better than a crisis to really pull the organization, I think, together. And in fact, I would suggest that there is nothing better to survive a crisis than a very clear purpose. And what I've found in terms of what's really unfolded over the last few months in the health crisis that, let's face it, has exacerbated the economic crisis that has been building for far longer. And this duality of really understanding that we've got to both safeguard lives and safeguard livelihoods in South Africa, that became very clear for us at IQ Business that when the pressure really mounted and we had the declaration of the state of a national disaster and then the following week the commencement of lockdown, we knew exactly what to do. And that clarity of thought really came about because we had prepared. And I think it's very difficult to prepare for a pandemic or to plan for the kind of implications of the crises that we're now in. But we were just inspired to race towards the problem.
I mean, that's a truly inspiring thought. I mean, would you like to tell us a little bit about what that's actually sparked in terms of initiatives and actions that the business has taken?
Yeah, I mean, the major focus has actually been externally within the economy that we operate in, but at the same time recognizing we are a for-profit business in our own right. So the adjustments that we've had to make in the economic crisis and in the situation really are ones that I think every business is suddenly facing around the challenges and the situation that we now find ourselves in. But at the same time, making sure the organization is aligning itself. So the primary focus that we have undertaken is in the launch of what we call the COBRA initiative. And COBRA stands for the COVID Business Rescue Assistance Initiative. And the idea came about in between the declaration of national disaster and the commencement of lockdown. So 2 days before lockdown, we had a discussion with two business partners in Schindler's Attorneys and Engaged Business Turnaround. And we decided that the lockdown was going to create a diabolical, if not a catastrophic, economic tsunami for businesses of all sizes in the South African economy. And we decided to form the COBRA initiative. And indeed, from thinking about the idea to launching the idea was 2 days. So on the first day of lockdown, we launched COBRA, we launched the website, we held our first webinar to assist distressed businesses. And from there, it has just exploded in terms of the need that we are satisfying or the cause that we are supporting with that initiative.
And is that something that you're seeing both the sort of I'd imagine the public sector are very supportive of it. Are you seeing lots of hands being raised in the private sector as well to say, how can we contribute, how can we be leaders, and how can we support this movement?
That in itself, Tom, has been, I would suggest, really remarkable. And we've gone from 3 initiating partners in COBRA to now 65 companies that have stepped forward, that have become what we call COBRA partners. And every one of those companies have pledged their services or their product or their support to distressed businesses on a means-tested or pro bono basis. And the wide array of different businesses cover local and international and global organizations. From a global sense, Microsoft are providing the technology and the platform, as well as Atlassian, who are based in Australia, as well as Cashflow Story, who are also based in Australia. We've had organizations on the local scene that cover business services organizations, funding organizations, as well as technology providers, and also social support organizations like Lifeline, for example, that we recognize with Lifeline that there is an enormous amount of trauma involved in the distressed business environment, where business leaders are dealing with challenges in terms of their gearing, in terms of their employees, in terms of their stakeholders. So a massive amount of effort has come together in this remarkable response to the challenges. And just to tell you a little story, at the weekend I was speaking to a chap called Eric Goldman in Toronto, who's picked up our work in South Africa on COBRA. And he's a very successful businessman. He's developed and run several technology companies, but he's offering a manuscript for a book that he's writing around how to start a business. And it's the most amazing connection in terms of being able to leverage his intellectual property into the crisis and being able to make use of all of the suggestions that are coming from these different providers around the world.
It's just incredible to hear that. And you know, I suppose my insight and my experience tells me that there's a lot of purpose-driven businesses out there, and maybe, as you say, it did take a crisis to actually galvanize them into a cohesive, organized structure to actually leverage the synergistic effects of all of their input. And are you seeing that maybe as a sign that actually, there's a sort of a changing mindset in broader business circles around stakeholder centricity, business in service of society and not just shareholders? Is this actually a spark that's highlighting a slightly different movement in the economy?
Definitely. I mean, that's that really, I think the realization of the health crisis in terms of the level of inequality in the world. And there's no better place, I think, to see that than in South Africa. And indeed, if I look out of my window towards Sandton or across the way to Alexandra, there is no better illustration of the inequality gap that is created between what is arguably the richest square kilometre in South Africa versus one of the poorest areas in South Africa. And I'm reminded, Tom, of one of the webinars that we ran on Cobra was with Pepe Murray from Joe Public, one of our Cobra partners. And Joe Public are the country's leading or largest communications, advertising and creative agencies. And Pepe's, I would consider him to be the leading light in terms of purpose in the South African context. He's even written a book about it, and he's writing another book now. That purpose is no longer a differentiator. That so many businesses have understood that purpose is key in terms of engagement of the organization in its role, firstly with its own employees, but also in its role in society. But what Pepe said is that the differentiator is now the actions that flow from the purpose. And that's really the test of whether the organization sees purpose as a marketing gimmick or just a statement or something that goes in the reception area that is there, versus really driving the actions and the thinking within that organization and the role that is played. And I really believe that this is the shift that we're seeing in terms of consciousness within companies, and the realization that we need to move from a shareholder value focus to a shared value focus, and that we must consider the role of business in society or in the environment or just in the economy at large in which business is operating, to partner with government and civil society to drive effective outcomes.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of the purpose exercise, I think all businesses would like to believe they have a purpose, and all businesses would like to believe they are somehow purpose driven. But actually, it is in the sustained actions that support your purpose narrative that the proof is ultimately in the pudding. And I know that IQ Business is a Certified B Corp, which is part of a global movement of businesses of force for good. What prompted you to go down that path of becoming certified, and what has it done inside the business to galvanize staff, to attract and retain customers, and also to help you think differently about the role that IQ Business is playing in society and the broader business marketplace?
Well, Tom, the story in terms of our B Corporation certification really started in 2016 into 2017, and we became certified in 2018, and we really saw that what B Corporation has done, and now with over 3,300 for-profit entities around the world that have taken the step to becoming a B Corp or becoming certified across the 200 or so metrics that we have to submit. It really provided for us a way to understand the direction that we were taking. And again, I'd refer back to Pepe's statement that purpose is not a differentiator, that actions are. But indeed, the next step is measurement, is to really use measurement to guide and direct the choices that we're making. And what we found with B Corporation is the measurement framework is a very good way to critique how we're doing as an organization. And indeed, at this point, we're going through a recertification. And what we're expecting and what we're finding is that we're getting a lot of value back in terms of the gaps in our approach or the opportunities for advancement that will really move us forward. And the connection to B Corporation was actually made through the support that we provided to one of the not-for-profit organizations called Partners for Possibility. And Partners for Possibility is an education-based intervention that is working in bringing business and public schools together in a collaborative mentorship engagement that works both ways in terms of a school principal and a business leader working together. And if you've ever gone into a public school environment, you'll see that what it's like to operate in a scarce resource environment. And a school principal is effectively an enterprise leader. They cease to be a teacher, they become a business leader or an enterprise leader. And through our engagement and our work there, we actually introduced the founder of Partners for Possibility into the YPO network in New York. And YPO being the Young Presidents Organization. And the founder of Partners for Possibility was hosted at an event in New York. And one of the hosts there returned the compliment of us introducing Louise into the interested parties in New York. They then introduced B Corp to us, but with one of those sayings in YPO, which is you get voluntold to do something. They're basically saying, have a look at this and consider it, but we're telling you, you should do this. And when it arrived and I read the book, it was crystal clear. This was really what we needed to do as the next step in our own journey and our own learning.
Yeah, I love that idea of being voluntold, but I guess people only volunteer you something when they really understand that this is a very good fit for the organization. Yeah, as you well know, the B Corp movement has laid further roots in Southern Africa now, so we have an on-the-ground presence. And I'd like to understand from your experience, having been at the forefront of initiatives like Cobra, which is in effect a movement. How would you recommend that the B Corp movement be built out in South Africa, knowing that this is actually a tool that purpose-driven businesses can use to guide their operations and to hold themselves accountable and to signal clearly to differentiate themselves?
Oh, very much. I mean, there's a really easy answer to that, Tom, and that is that Cobra itself, as you say, has become a movement, or it's where like-minded businesses have responded to the crisis and have come together very rapidly. And when we've outlined the approach that we're taking with Cobra and the ask that we place on the businesses that join the Cobra ecosystem, for the most part, it was a no-brainer for those organizations. And as I mentioned, we now have 65 enterprises, businesses locally and internationally that have joined the call to arms. I think as a target market, we should be marketing B Corporation to those enterprises. And I know for a fact that there are many of them that would want to consider and engage in their own development and journey of really advancing their own purpose. So in a nutshell, that would be my recommendation, would be to come and in fact have B Corporation become a partner to Cobra and then to engage once it is a partner with all of those organizations. And out of interest, we've just brought on board, there is a South African movement called Unashamedly Ethical. And it was started about 10 years ago by a business leader who realized in the construction industry that he was leading his family-owned business, that ethics were not coming into the decision-making process within his business. And he decided that he wanted to do something about that. And he created a focus on ethical business and named it Unashamedly Ethical. And they are now present in 140 countries around the world and have a range of other businesses that have joined that movement. And Unashamedly Ethical have just become a Cobra partner in order to share their view of business ethics among the 65 organizations. I think B Corporation presents a broader view and a focal point that I think could be highly beneficial in deriving synergies across that.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like there's definitely a conversation to be picked up on that front. You know, Adam, in talking to you, it sounds like you feel and seem to be very in control of the situation that your business is in and also the role that it's playing in the broader landscape. What would you say to business leaders who aren't in the same position where that you're in and ultimately are facing a crisis point, which not only, I think, as you said earlier, there's also an emotional component to what people are facing. There's a knock-on from your business experience and your sustainable ability to provide for family and your own mindset. Just from a leadership perspective, what would you be recommending people to do to really make sense and contextualize the positions they're in and how best to move forward?
Tom, we, along with all the other businesses, absorbed the announcement, I think it was on the 15th, 16th of March from the president that we were entering a state of national disaster. We had to think very rapidly because then what followed a week later was the lockdown and the imposition of lockdown. And very quickly as a leadership team, we came together and we recognized a very basic framework that needed to guide the decisions that we made. And we called it our duty of care framework. And it's actually a kind of a three elements that are very closely aligned and related to each other. And our duty of care in the first instance relates to the service that we provide to our clients. And we recognize as a leadership team, we must continue to support our clients as they go through these challenging times. So that was number one. Number two was our duty of care to our IQers or our employees, and making sure that in the provision of the service that we provide to our clients, we protect them, we safeguard them, we follow workplace plans, we ensure that face masks, sanitizer, social distancing, all the various elements are managed to keep them safe, and making sure if there are vulnerable members of that team that we ensure that they receive extra support and protection. And then the third element relates to our business as IQ Business. So if you can understand IQ Business, our clients and our IQers all relate together. And the decisions that we make must be driven also in the context of sustaining and supporting our business, where we have a broad base of stakeholders, our shareholders, our creditors, many other stakeholders that are there. And that framework has really been used over and over again as we absorbed the implications of the state of national disaster, as we went into lockdown level 5 as an essential service provider, and we remained open and operational, as we then went through into lockdown level 4 and we started to see the opportunity to reopen physical outlets and areas, as we then indeed had our first infection, and how we then ensured that we managed that process using our workplace plan. As we've moved through all of these different phases and stages of the crisis, we've constantly referred back to the duty of care and to the decisions that we need to make in concert around those three critical stakeholder groups.
Brilliant. So the recommendation actually is that through a simple construct of looking at the core of the business, ultimately, it's what makes the business tick. It's the operations, it's the people, and it's your clients. That if you're doing the best you can for all those individual stakeholders, that ultimately beyond that there are some things that are potentially out of your control, and you need to do the best you can within the context of what you actually can influence. Culture is an important part of that, and I wanted to just touch on the IQers themselves, most of which are working remotely at the moment. How has culture played a role in keeping the level of resilience up, the level of motivation and passion up, and ultimately driven the business into this position where you are leading a movement of support in the broader landscape, not just into your clients?
Tom, that's really, I think, at the core of culture is the value, strong definition of their value system, and yet I sometimes struggle to see how that value system translates into actions or into behaviours. At IQ Business, we have a very clear what we call our formula for success, and in fact, I have a summary copy of our formula for success that sits in front of me, and it represents 10 good behaviors that are represented by our green cards, and 10 not so good behaviors that sometimes creep into our business. But this is really what guides us and drives us, and how we test ourselves in terms of the response that we have to situations. And I think if we think about the March-April cycle and then May-June cycle that we saw in the first 4 months of the crisis as it unfolded, I think it's fair to say that every organization went through a pretty tough period in March and April, and everybody was in shock and dealing with all the issues that represented. What I saw our IQers do was really apply their minds very quickly to what's new in the world around us. To your point, what can we control and what can't we control? That's so important. It's come up so many times in the debates that we've had, either in our leadership team or in the business. Let's isolate those out of control factors and let's really manage the things that we can control as an enterprise. And then how we really translated that into what's emerging as a new normal. I don't think we're in the new normal yet. It's still emerging. The pendulum has swung from one extreme to the other, from working in an office space to working remotely, or all the other changes that we've seen. But what I did see was a very rapid pace of innovation, a very rapid connection with each other using technologies like this, or really evolving quicker than our clients perhaps were in responding to the crises. And that's really switched the momentum using a very positive energy that was established in those first 2 months into May and June of this year, where we actually had our 2 strongest months of our financial year, principally because of the level of positivity, the clarity of thinking in the organization, and the actions that were flowing very quickly from that.
Yeah, and no doubt the fact that your clients were needing to reframe their own existence and their own operations to contextually be relevant for the time that we are in. And there's so many references to the new normal, and a provocation of how we can make this a better normal. There's a global narrative about build back better. And the work that you're doing into your clients, I'm sure you're putting that framing thought into their minds. It's not just about surviving the storm, it's about reshaping business for a more prosperous future.
Tom, you've reminded me only this morning, I was looking at the World Economic Forum, and they have just launched an initiative called the Great Reset. I've only had time to really scan through the concept and the approach that they're taking, but it speaks to exactly what you're mentioning there, that there is a realization, and when the World Economic Forum starts to really get its head around this, is to basically say that capitalism in its old form is dead. Long live capitalism, in terms of now moving into a completely different focal point. And inclusive growth is, I think, the epicenter of that in this concept of the great reset. And what they appear to be doing is wanting to bring together organizations across business, government, and civil society to really focus on the implications. What does it mean? What needs to change? What needs to be done within each of the participating organizations to really achieve a different outcome?
I'd love to ask you to expand on that, because business does operate in an ecosystem, and there's there's a policy infrastructural system, there's capital markets. What on a macro level do you think needs to change to actually help enable this shift that we are seeing?
Well, at a macro level, we talk a lot about GDP as a measure of success. And in the South African context at the moment, we have a negative GDP. And in fact, this year, the estimates are that we're going to see GDP decline this year by somewhere between 10 and 15%, which is massive. It's the greatest decline. Around the world, we're seeing economies implode and go backwards or into a recessionary cycle. But we would argue that GDP as a macro measure of progress is not sufficient. And indeed, at IQ Business, we partnered 3 years ago with the Social Progress Imperative, which is a Washington-based global initiative, which is really looking at what the key measures of progress should be that we believe define inclusivity or define inclusive growth, and break down the out of interest GDP, which was a measure which was put into place during the Great Depression in the late 1920s. And even the originator of the concept of GDP went on record to say, be careful how you use this, because it doesn't define the goal that you should be, as countries or organizations, really heading towards. So we believe that social progress and the social progress index is what should be really the driving force for this, either the Great Reset or for the motivation of countries and economies to really be driving towards.
Yeah, and I think it couldn't be more relevant contextually than in Africa, as you said earlier, with the sort of gross legacy of inequality that we have. In more established Western markets, European markets, there's relative homogenous income levels, education levels, and so on. But we have this gross inequality, which, in my personal belief, business has an incredibly strong leveraging point or leveraging effect to be able to shift into a more optimal future, I think, for us all, a shared and prosperous future.
Well, so much, and it's illustrated, I think, in South Africa, where we are breaching 70% youth unemployment. That is the largest level of youth disengagement in the world. It is absolutely critical that we tackle that problem. General unemployment, I would argue, has already exceeded 40%. We're just talking about 30% at this point. And let's remind ourselves, during the Great Depression, the unemployment reached the heady heights of about 25%. So we're already way over that, with 40%, including those that have just given up hope of looking for work. But our youth, the future of our economy, at over 70% disengaged, not in employment, education, or training. That's catastrophic. And again, back to the social progress index is that there are three components that make up the structure. One is just basically focusing on basic human needs. How well or how good are we at providing and supporting the basic needs of human beings? Secondly, what are the foundations of well-being that go into access to basic education and communication? And then the third dimension is about opportunity. And it's there that we fall down the greatest in terms of the lack of opportunity either in a zero growth economy, or at this point, the potential of an economic depression in South Africa that is not providing the opportunities for our youngsters to be able to move forward. And that's what we've got to get on top of and resolve.
Well, Adam, you clearly are very passionate about that point, and it's a point very well made. I'm gonna leave you with one last question, which is maybe an invitation to lift the veil into the man behind the role. But what's inspiring you on a personal level now? There seems to be so much in the business context that has you fired up, and it's great to see. You know, home life, family life, what's keeping you motivated, inspired, and balanced?
Well, my family is the great leveler. That it's really wonderful to go home, and it's probably one of the most positive consequences of lockdown is that my wife, my 19-year-old son, who just started this year at UCT, and shame, he had 2 months of freedom and then he's back at home with mum and dad, and my 17-year-old daughter, who's in grade 11 at this point. But to be together every night for a family meal and a family conversation is just amazing. It's never happened before, and I don't expect it to go on forever, but it's really a wonderful way to have that connection as a family. And from a personal perspective, my own purpose and the realization that I had 4 years ago when I defined my personal purpose and how that has evolved into really providing a level of energy and focus for me that makes me feel that I'm in exactly the right place at the right time. And my journey here had a reason. And the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now is that my journey's led me to this point, and I have a clear understanding of my purpose. And I love what I do at IQ Business with an enterprise of 700 people who want to be part of our broader purpose as well, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic indeed. And I think, just evidence that there are silver linings in what is otherwise, a dire situation for many. But reflecting on what is actually happening on a personal, family, spiritual, health level is also very, very important, because this is certainly an unusual time to be alive. Adam, with that, I'm going to thank you very much for your generosity of thought, your time, and I continue to wish you well for the future, and you have our full support in terms of all the initiatives you're driving, the commitments you've made to making South Africa a better place. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Wonderful to talk to you as always. Thanks so much.